Our text today, Matthew chapter 24, 32 through 44. 6 hours sharpening the axe. It's not what I did over vacation, by the way, no. Matthew 24, verse 32. Now learn a lesson from the fig tree. When its branches bud and its leaves begin to sprout, you know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see all these things, you can know his return is very near, right at the door. I tell you the truth. This generation will not pass from the scene until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will disappear, but my words will never disappear. However, no one knows the day or hour when these things will happen, not even the angels in heaven or the Son himself. Only the Father knows. When the Son of Man returns, it will be like it was in Noah's day. In those days before the flood, the people were enjoying banquets and parties and weddings right up to the time Noah entered his boat. People didn't realize what was going to happen until the flood came and swept them all away. That is the way it will be when the Son of Man comes. 2 men will be working together in the field. One will be taken, the other left. 2 women will be grinding flour at the mill. One will be taken, the other left. So you too must keep watch, for you don't know what day your Lord is coming. Understand this. If a homeowner knew exactly when a burglar was coming, he would keep watch and not permit his house to be broken into. You also must be ready all the time, for the Son of Man will come when least expected. When you think of Kansas, what do you think of? Well, yeah, you probably think of grassy fields and farms and flat expanses of waving grain with very, very few people or buildings. Or maybe you think of Dorothy or the Wizard of Oz when you think of Kansas. I don't know what you really think of. Whatever comes to mind when thinking about this American state, what probably doesn't come to mind when you think about Kansas is luxury condo complexes for the wealthy to retreat to. I mean, it's not really known as this vacation destination state where the rich and the powerful are going there for luxury accommodations to retreat to when they want to. But in fact, this is what Kansas is. This exists in the state of Kansas. World-class accommodations are there that would fit right into any modern city anywhere. And people are spending obscene amounts of money for these things. In Kansas. Why? Well, if you want one, if you got a bunch of money in your bank account and you're itching to spend it, there's a catch, okay? You have to live, if you buy one, you have to buy it and you have to live in it underground, like a burrowing animal. All of these units are underground in a refurbished nuclear missile silo in the middle of nowhere in Kansas. Who's in? Who wants one? Nobody. If we all pool our money together, maybe we can buy maybe a quarter of one. I'm not sure. Yeah, in the most rural places in America, decommissioned nuclear missile silos left over from the Cold War back in the 60s and such. They're put out of use by the nuclear weapons reduction efforts of the 80s and 90s. And what was once a useless space then, it became useless after it was no longer needed. The missile was gone. It became useless. What was once useless, many of these are being converted into places for the wealthy to live in nuclear missile silos. Who would want to do that? Why would rich people want an underground condo in Kansas anyway? And they do want them. And they're lining up to purchase them. And they want them. Why do they want them? They want them because when the apocalypse happens, they will have a safe place to ride it out and survive whatever is going to come. But this is no mere survival. I mean, this is not just like grinding it out when the world comes to an end or when disaster strikes. While the zombies are attacking the rest of the unlucky humans like you and I, still out in the open, or when anarchy becomes the rule of the land, or when some pandemic wreaks havoc and kills off massive percentages of the population, or when climate change spirals out of control and our ecosystem collapses, these condo owners will be swimming in their underground full-size pool with a water slide. That's what they'll be doing while we're struggling and suffering. And they'll be exercising on their climbing wall, full-size climbing wall underground, or relaxing in their movie theater, watching thousands of different movies that they have, all underground and secured from the outside world. Some of them have already spent time in their second home here underground. Well, it could be their third or fourth home. We don't really know. When COVID took hold, many of them rushed to their condos to lock down and to ride out what may have come until they could see what was going on in the world, and then they came out again to get back into the world. And if anything were to happen to them while they're in their condos, they have a medical station in the underground complex, along with food that will last for years and years and years, as well as survival supplies and propane for generator power, and of course guns, lots and lots of guns. They're all down there, and it's all surrounded by a high, strong fence with guards and cameras all around. In short, they are prepared for whatever. They're ready. Of course, we call them doomsday preppers. They come in many different shapes and sizes out there in survival strategies. Maybe you know some preppers. I'm sure there are some in Gilmanton here. Maybe your neighbors are some of these doomsday preppers. Maybe you have no idea what they've got underground below their house, but they're all around the country, and they're all around the world actually, all with different methods and plans, but they all have one thing in common. They all want to be ready when it hits. Whatever it is that hits. Whatever it is, chaos or some comet from space, or they're exemplifying the old scout model, be prepared. And they are. Because you never know when that day will come. And this is exactly what Jesus was trying to say in our text today. Verse 44 of our text today. You also must be ready all the time, for the Son of Man will come when least expected. When least expected. Prior to our text that we just read here today, Jesus was busy explaining what was going to happen when the end arrives. And you can go ahead and read that on your own when you go home today, the previous section. But a word of warning, it's a little bit concerning, the things he's talking about. So naturally, the disasters that Jesus is talking about, Jesus' followers, when they heard this, they wanted to be ready. They want to be ready for this whenever this day is coming. This sounds horrible. We need to be prepared for this. And Jesus wanted his followers to be prepared for that day and that hour when it would happen. Because being prepared is very, very important, is it not? It's important to be prepared, no matter what you're preparing for. I mean, you want to be prepared for a lot of things in life. You want to be prepared for a meeting at work. You want to be prepared for a holiday meal, right? You don't want to just show up, oh, I don't have any food. You want to be prepared for, also the end of life as we know it. Preparing is paramount. Abraham Lincoln once said this. He said, if I had 8 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend 6 hours sharpening my axe, because he believed in being very, very prepared. And that is the theory of the luxury doomsday condo builders and buyers. Spend lots of time preparing for the worst so that you can experience the best. Stephen King said this. He said, there's no harm in hoping for the best as long as you're prepared for the worst. Getting all your ducks in a row can't happen when they're all running around, quacking and panicking. It has to happen when things are still calm and predictable, because if everything's chaotic, the ducks are not going to get into a row. You won't be able to find them all. They're all everywhere. So get them in a row while things are calm is the idea. John F. Kennedy said, the time to repair the roof is when the sun is still shining. Don't do it while the rains come. So, we need to spend some time sharpening our axes, if you will, to prepare. And Jesus said it well in verse 32. Now learn a lesson from the fig tree. When its branches bud and its leaves begin to sprout, you know that summer is near. So be prepared for summer. You know what's coming. Read the seasons, but also really what he meant is read the signs of the time. Verse 33. In the same way, when you see all these things, and all these things are what Jesus was talking about before, you can know that his return is very near, right at the door. Be ready. As if it's going to happen tomorrow, said Jesus. Be ready if it's going to happen in an hour, said Jesus. Get ready while the getting ready is good. And you can never be prepared too soon, because you don't know when the event or the apocalypse or the sudden change is going to transpire. Even Jesus would agree. Verse 35. Heaven and earth will disappear, but my words will never disappear. 36. However, no one knows the day or hour when these things will happen, not even the angels in heaven or the Son himself. Only the Father knows. When Jesus was preaching, you can read it in the Gospels in several different locations. When Jesus preached, he preached as though the end was just around the corner. He was expressing an urgency. He was urging the people to sharpen the axes. Start now to sharpen those axes and be ready. Interesting, though, Jesus was convinced that it was all going to happen imminently, like within a very short period of time. Verse 34, take a look at what he says. I tell you the truth, said Jesus, this generation will not pass from the scene until all these things take place. And he made other statements like this elsewhere in the Gospels, and no doubt told his followers on many occasions that the end, all of that was going to happen very, very soon, like within a generation, like within a short amount of time, 2,000 years ago, very soon. And he told his followers this, no doubt. And all the disciples and the Apostle Paul felt this way too, that it was going to happen extremely soon. And they were all busy making preparations themselves and urging others to do the same. Be ready, they were saying. Be ready. They were preparing for a cataclysmic event that signaled the arrival of the kingdom of God, with reward for some, judgment for others. Verse 37. When the Son of Man returns, it will be like it was in Noah's day. And we all know the story of Noah. Verse 38, in those days before the flood, the people were not sharpening their axes. Only Noah was. The people were enjoying banquets and parties and weddings right up to the time Noah entered his boat. People didn't realize what was going to happen until the flood came and swept them all away. That is the way it will be when the Son of Man comes. Verse 40, this verse always concerns me. Verse 40, 2 men will be working together in the field. One will be taken, the other left. In verse 41, 2 women will be grinding flour at the mill. One will be taken, and the other left. What concerning verses those are. It's like they weren't ready. They were doing their thing, and they just weren't ready. They weren't ready for the day to happen. They were prepared. They didn't know. And Jesus wanted them to be prepared. He wanted them to be prepared for it to happen soon. Of course, it hasn't happened. It's been 2,000 years, and the Son of Man hasn't come on the clouds with glory and power. That current generation, 2,000 years ago, came and went with no apocalypse, at least not that we know of. And the apostles were obviously aware that over time that the Lord was taking a lot longer than they expected to come back. Where is he? I mean, he said he was going to come within a generation. Like a lot of us would still be alive when he came, but where is he? As time went on, and the longer that Jesus took, and you can even see this in Paul's writings, where in the early church, in the early writings of his letters to the church, he was really preparing the people for the second coming of Christ, saying things like, it's best not to marry so that you can devote yourself to Jesus while the time is short. But as the years went by and the end didn't come, Paul kind of shifted his focus, preparing people for more of the long haul, not really knowing when Jesus would come back, but preparing them nonetheless, because you need to be prepared. A man named Harry R. Truman, not Harry S. Truman, but Harry R. Truman, a very similar name to the president. Harry R. Truman was born on October 30th, 1896. His birthday really isn't important, but the day he died was a big day. Harry R. Truman, again, not the president, was an American businessman, a bootlegger, according to Wikipedia, and a prospector. He lived, get this, he lived near Mount St. Helens. We all remember Mount St. Helens, right? Yeah. He lived right near Mount St. Helens, which is an active volcano in the state of Washington. And he was the owner and the caretaker of the Mount St. Helens Lodge at Spirit Lake. It was right near the base of the mountain. Well, Truman, not the president, he came to fame as a folk hero of the day and the months leading up to the volcano's eruption back in 1980. He refused to leave his home despite the evacuation orders. He wouldn't go. And of course, he was killed by the flow of stuff that overtook his lodge after that great explosion of Mount St. Helens. And he was buried in that site under 150 feet of volcanic debris. He died May 18th of 1980 when Mount St. Helens erupted. But that reminds me of our text today and Jesus' comments. Verse 43, Harry Truman knew, he understood, and Jesus said this. He said, understand this. If a homeowner knew exactly when a burglar was coming, he'd keep watch and not permit his house to be broken into. Verse 44, you also must be ready all the time, for the Son of Man will come when least expected. He said, be ready. But Mr. Truman, he refused to do what he was told to do. He knew. He understood. He knew he should be ready, and perhaps he was ready enough to let his life go at that point. I don't know. He loved the mountain, no doubt. But apparently he was just so cantankerous and stubborn, and many thought that he was such an old fool that he refused to listen to the obvious signs that it was not going well where he was. So what is the moral of the story of Mr. Truman getting buried by all that volcanic debris back in 1980? The moral of the story is, don't be an old fool, right? Don't be an old fool. But so often we're just like Mr. Truman. We're so like Mr. Truman. Or even if we're not so stubborn and ornery as him, we tend to put off preparation, right? We tend to put off preparation over and over again. We don't ready ourselves like we should. You know, we get our 8 hours to cut down a tree, but the job takes us 16 hours because we never sharpened the axe. We just went right into it with a big dull axe, beating on the tree for 16 hours. We could have done an 8 if we got ready to do it. But what's the true moral of the story? What's the true lesson of the story from both Mr. Truman's story and the story that Jesus is saying? The true lesson is to prepare. It's to get ready. It's to be ready. But again, so often, and for so many things, we don't seem to do this. So why don't we do it? Why don't we like to get ready? Why don't we like to prepare? Well, one expert explains that people do not prepare for emergencies, like when emergencies are going to happen. People don't prepare for such emergencies because they believe certain things. And let me know if you kind of resonate with some of these statements that people make. They say that, oh, everything will be fine, right? How many times have you made that one? The odds of disaster are just too small. Or I'll jinx the whole thing if I get ready for it, right? Some of you are superstitious like that. Or here's one, the government will save me. No, the government's probably not going to save you. Someone else is prepared for the both of us. Well, who is that someone else? I don't have enough room. I don't have enough time. People will think I'm crazy. Here's one. I don't have enough money to do something like that. Or I don't have the right skills. Or I refuse to give in to fear and paranoia. Or here's a classic one. I'm just too old. I don't want to do that. Or my faith will save me. You know, all of these things are what we say to ourselves and others as we neglect to pay attention to the fig leaves preparing to sprout. But putting aside such, things like a zombie apocalypse or some other global disaster, and just thinking about the return of Christ that's being talked about in our Bible verse today, how can we prepare for Christ's return? This is what Advent is about, Christ's coming and also Christ's return. How can we prepare for Christ's return if we have no idea what his ETA is? And when is he going to get here? Being ready would not be a problem if we knew when he was going to show, right? If we knew the day and the hour, well, what would you do? You just do whatever you want to do, but then at the last minute, what do? You just shape up at the last minute, and you sober up or whatever before his arrival, and then you get ready. Oh, here I am, I'm ready. I've been ready for a long time, Jesus. Yeah, right, sure. And it seems, to be honest, let's be honest, it seems like someone or so many people are always saying that the sky is falling. They're running around, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. Everyone's got us commenting on how the sky is falling. How can we believe them anymore? Nothing's happened. Over and over. The Archbishop of York in England preached a sermon in which he said this, the Archbishop of York. He said, "Beloved ones, know what is true. The world is in haste, and it is nearing the end," he said. And you hear this stuff a lot nowadays. But interesting, the sermon by the Archbishop of York was preached by him back in the year 1014. 1014. How many years ago was that? Yeah, about 1,000. But, these apocalyptic statements could have appeared yesterday in the New York Times, but this is over 1,000 years ago. England was in a dire state. The Vikings, their enemies, were raiding them over and over again. And not the Vikings that beat the Patriots the other day, by the way, in a really embarrassing game. But the actual Vikings that were raiding them over and over again and making their lives miserable. The morale in England was down. They were miserable and gloomy. And in this apocalyptic sermon, the Archbishop speaks to a country that he thought was in total moral collapse. England, 1,000 years ago. He said, nothing has prospered now for a long time, at home or abroad. And he said, listing these things, there's harrying and hunger, burning and bloodshed, plague and pillaging, unfair taxation among the many evils afflicting the nation. The end was at hand, he said. But that was 1,000 years ago. And the end never came. And the world kept turning every new day. Kind of like when Jesus said that the end was coming within that generation, but yet it didn't. And like so many uncountable numbers of people and pastors and prophets through the centuries and the decades, they have said that the end is here over and over again and judgment is at the door. Jesus is returning. You hear it all the time, every single generation. And interestingly, many of these people have the escape plan and method of surviving the end, which usually doesn't involve luxury condos and old missile silos, but sadly does often include sending some form of financial gift to them as they preach on and on. Because Jesus is coming, you better get ready by sending in money. But yet he hasn't. And we as people have learned to tune them out over and over, as yet another doomsday predictor got it wrong again and again and again. I mean, can you blame us for not wanting to be constantly ready for this thing, whatever it is, whenever it's going to come? And to not want to live in a state of continuous preparation for the end of time? It's not feasible to live that way. Yet the words of Jesus remain. Verse 44, you must be ready all the time. For the Son of Man will come when least expected. So how do we get ready? How can we be ready and prepared all the time? How should we keep our axes sharp for the tree? What do we have to do so that we can escape the chaos and not be left behind? Rich people are building condos and silos. Religious people are watching ever so closely and intently for Jesus' escape plan. Everyone seems to want to be ready for the big escape, but no one knows how. But if you want my opinion on all this, I'd say this. Don't get ready for Jesus' return. Don't attempt to prepare yourself for the arrival of Christ on the clouds. Why? Why? Because I think he's already come back. I think Jesus has already come back. And to be prepared is to realize that Jesus has come back. His return has happened over and over again. If you want to be ready for whatever the future holds, if you want to be ready for the arrival of Jesus, then be ready when he arrives at your front door with a need. Because that's where he comes. Be ready to greet him when he shows up at the homeless shelter, cold and hungry and, yes, dirty and smelly. Be ready to greet him because he has come back. That's where he is. Have your axe sharpened when Jesus asks for your help, and it's usually at the most inconvenient time. Be prepared when Jesus calls or texts you on the phone, needing to talk about a problem or some heartache. Jesus, in the very next chapter of Matthew, he said, whatever you do to the least of my people, you're doing it unto me. Jesus has come back. He's coming back today, and he'll come back again tomorrow. But are you ready now? Are you prepared now to welcome him? Are you prepared to feed him? Are you ready to clothe him, to visit him in prison, to love and care for him in this life? Are you prepared? And indeed, also, Jesus arrives when you step in and act as his hands and feet in the world. Because Jesus is in you. You want Jesus to come back, show up somewhere and Jesus comes back. Be Jesus in this world. Don't wait for Jesus to come in some future date. He's here now. He's returned 1,000,000 times, and he's going to return 1,000,000 more. Be ready for that. You know, we don't know much about when Jesus might show up in a cloud of glory. It's been 2,000 years, honestly. It could go 2,000 more, or 4,000, or 100,000. I don't know. But Jesus has returned 1,000,000 times. And he will return 1,000,000 more. Be ready. And when he does, in his name, we love and we serve and we show kindness. In short, we live as though Jesus has already come again. For indeed he has. He has come again in us. Can you please stand for our final song today, calling our singers forward. Come, thou long-expected Jesus. It's the other classic hymn that we sing during the time of Advent, number 187 in your hymnal. Come, thou long-expected Jesus.